for us.
We're here at Azora Festival 2017 with Ananda Bosman. So my first question for you, Ananda, is you spoke the other day in your talk, you touched briefly on near-death and UFO encounters. Could you explain in a bit more detail your UFO encounter and how it affected your reality tunnel?
The UFO encounters happened after the near-death experience. So when I was 15, I had a bicycle accident where I hit the front of my head. I was into sport and BMXing and stuff like that. And I was going through the no pain, no gain barrier, cycling up the hill, going beyond the adrenaline and endorphin shot to get the willpower into the body. The torque took the chain off the bike. I went head over heels in slow motion, got a flash on the side of my head. Beautiful, fantastic. Everything started spinning, echoing, weird sounds. I went into a golden sphere. I was surrounded by golden presences, and I saw past, present, and future, these lines going into the future. For instance, my future LSD experience, which I would experience the other way around, and an experience I had when I was 2 years and 8 months in the Swiss Alps, where I also went into a golden sphere. My mum was painting in the Swiss Alps, and I disappeared. So her 2.5-year-old son disappeared. Search party very high up, about 3,500 meters. So a search party was looking for me, and when I came out of the golden sphere, I was making lemon skates. So that's one of the earliest experiences. After my near-death experience, I started seeing a lot of UFOs, but this subject is very taboo for the entheogenic movement, just as entheogens are very taboo for the UFO movement. It's a big problem.
Is it taboo?
Very taboo. The most taboo. I would say the UFO is the most taboo subject on this planet.
On this planet, but not as part of the entheogenic community.
Yeah, but it's always looked at as an internal experience or DMT-induced experience alone, and very often there's a tendency towards that, and that the entities are separate from that. There is something real, very, very, very real.
Well, what about group sightings?
Yeah, exactly. Group sightings, radar sightings, group and radar on plane, etc. Yeah. And interactivity is interesting. I mean, I've been engaging what we call dialogues, is where we try to get as much signal lines coming in from radiation, observation, direction, constellations, to psychic input, etc. And we have some pretty good results so far.
So when these UFOs appeared, what kind of format were they? What shape? How did they move? Did they move in ways that human technology could achieve, or way beyond?
Good question. I know where you're going. The black world has many special programs. I've had many sightings. So everything from zigzag. In dialogues we have an alphabet, and the alphabet in dialogues is after one has engaged a protocol which basically uses 8 hertz as the gate, because in a place in Norway called Hessdalen, scientists from all over the world, including Italy, have been measuring the manifestation of UFOs. So I asked Dr. Strand, did you get an 8 hertz signal before the Hessdalen UFO materializes? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, between 7.4 and 7.8, around 8 hertz, always before the thing comes on, takes on plasma. The object moves at 30,000 miles an hour, 180 degrees. Spectrum analysis shows rare earth element, scandium, only existing in that area of Norway. And then they shine a laser at it 3 times, it flashes 3 times. So those kind of things we do in dialogues. And
it tends to serve plasma.
So it went from plasma to solid metal.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And 8 hertz was the dawn. So we use it. So
okay, of course,
so we use 8 hertz as the protocol for engaging a dialogue, and we measure that as well with biofeedback devices. And we try to get these different responses, either with a laser or laser of coherency in the heart, which has been measured with the inner balance device of HeartMath. So you have sustained coherence, so that the 7 layers of heart muscle produce a toroidal cascade that's in the golden mean.
It's biofeedback, no?
So it's biofeedback, yeah. A zigzag is an alphabet, a power up and a jumper, one becoming several. There's a whole alphabet that way. So that can be at a distance, or it can be quite close, like 15 meters. Then it's usually very fast.
And do you think if you had a camera videoing?
Oh yeah, we've got stuff on camera, and also some of them appear in infrared only, and we're going to get a scintilla telescope which sees in antimatter. Because there's in my experience, there's a warfare going on in this particular domain.
So, do you think that the supposed aliens could be...
I don't believe in aliens,
no.
Per se. I think this is ultra-terrestrial. And if you look up ultra-terrestrial in the Urban Dictionary, it includes ourselves from the future, time traveling back, and similar scenarios.
Yeah.
Like this is a construct already from a time traveling civilization, and this is our entertainment system, and these are the tweakers, or behind stage, so to speak. You can see it that way. Ultra-terrestrial will have multi-dimensional, parallel universal, so it's much more broad spectrum.
So what is your opinion on David Icke's whole...
You really want to ask me that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm not going to say David Icke, I'm going to say the reptoid mythos, which was created by Sergeant Richard Doty for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. There was a real contactee, Dr. Paul Benevitz, head of Thunder Scientific. He got a film sighting of UFOs over the Monsanto weapon range in New Mexico nuclear facility. He immediately was contacted by Sergeant Doty and other members of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, told to take his radio ham and put it in the direction of Kirtland Air Force Base. And so they started intercepting his ham radio and saying that there are aliens on the base, various different species, and gave a dot matrix printout, which was reptoid. They made him completely lose it as a result. So he was one of the big sources of the reptilian mythos. Televisik took that up further. I don't believe in reptoids per se. I do think that the super civilization is us, and that our DNA, our junk DNA, contains every animal species and insect species. So when the full DNA is active, we have a hyper hologram that is every animal, insect, human in combination as a hyper hologram. I think that's our source, hypergenetics.
Just weaving in from that, there does seem to be a prevalent thought amongst the kind of Starseed crew that there are specific lines. So, for example, there's lines of Starseed nations like the reptilian, the lion, feline, and the bird tribe. So perhaps these were where these archetypes come in, and perhaps they're the strongest. What do you think about that?
Well, in terms of the felines, I like the Maus and Bastards and the Herukas of India, the lion-headed gods, the wrathful ones. I again think these are shamanic aspects. When wandering Soma, we've had cases where a scientist suddenly saw all of us have lion heads. However, I have speculated that this particular planet, being artificial, is a patchwork, and there are others like this, which has, let's say, more feline DNA with the human DNA. So you have humanoid felines, you have humanoid reptilians, humanoid insectoids, you have humanoid plants, humanoid canines, etc., operating within their own holographic matrix and interconnected to us. There is a description in the Puranas, which is correlating to the Rig Veda, of 432,000 Manuso, man-like species, which are each linked to 432,000 motor neurons, which are defined by the 432,000 syllables of the Rig Veda.
Wow.
Physiologically, and it is those 432,000 dopamine neurons associated to the central rexid, which produces our 5 sensorial realities. So all of these civilizations are the summation of us, and we are the summation of them. That's the model.
I'm literally having a cerebral orgasm listening to you. So just continuing on from this, I just wanted to ask you, so for some of us who are at a level to beginning to know ourselves, Perhaps we align with certain starseed nations. For example, for me, I've known since I was a very young child. My mother knew before I was even born that I was kind of had this feline vibration. So we talked a little bit yesterday in the panel regarding the different neuroreceptors for chemicals that we haven't even come across yet, and having the insight that we are all one, but invariably we are vastly different.
Yeah.
And we
unique,
all,
where each one is completely
so we all
unique.
coming from perhaps a differing starseed lineage, and so therefore we perhaps I would fit my my receptors would fit a certain type of entheogen or psychedelic more than another.
Yeah, sure.
And it's a great space when you know yourself enough to know what is native for you.
And that will change over time too, as the body changes.
Okay.
But 2 million phenotypes, so 2 million different reactions to every molecule.
Can you explain what phenotype means, please?
Well, genetic phenotypes are the way that one is genetically expressing one's relation to molecules, enzymes, etc.
Okay. Could you speak a little bit?
Then about Starseed, I think we have a temporary appearance of linearity, but I think it's only an appearance. It's holographic waves, and that what is encompassing it, that we're in the living room, is past, present, and future. So it's not coming from Pleiades or Orion, etc. Those are just modules that are used to steer the hyperhologram from a past, present, and future civilization that has synthesized itself through every genetic permutation, through every possible computer simulation, and is existing in a continuum of past, present, and future. But yet, having this interactive entertainment system gives a complete uniqueness of experience to the all-oneness that they have. Because here we're surrounded by lies, and the lies are different on every level, and they will change. And they must change, so there's never going to be one gospel truth that one can rely on. The milk will get sour, and it's supposed to be so there has to be an existential re-realization on an individual level. And this is how I see the
really
quintessence
know
of it.
Oneself, and then that's the kind of grounding for all of our work. But this is what I mean, that many of us, we all have individual brains and individual receptors.
Which I think is just a muscle.
Sorry?
Which I think is just a muscle, yeah.
So I might have an energy signature or a certain kind of biology that's slightly different on a physical, metaphysical level for ingesting a certain type of chemical. I'm using the word chemical because everything is chemical. That would be more fluid or more native or more resonant for me. And I'm just quite interested into, really having this space to think about all the chemicals that we haven't even come across yet, and all our receptors are thirsty for this alien kind of seeding in our to have this brain of chemical romance. And this just moves me on to another question, which you were the originator.
Oh no, there was a good question in there.
Okay, let's rewind
you could make
then.
a good
Let's
question.
rewind. Okay, we can do this. We're omnidirectional. We've already said this. Okay. So, just picking on the seeds of having receptors that are yet to be, for chemicals that are yet to be discovered. Can you talk a little bit about maybe future alien chemicals and why some of this resonate more with us?
Yeah, and plus there is the factor of the 108 soma plants, and for instance, Tribulus terrestris takes the psychedelic experience into the hormonal experience. So as you're having a psychedelic or entheogenic experience, the penoline will regulate the heart, it will take fat, turn it into muscle, it will create 31 hormones and balance that through the hypothalamus. So you have a biological translation, so it's a direct practical application of your experience.
So it recalibrates the endocrine system.
What?
It recalibrates the endocrine system.
Yeah, the balance of the hormones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for example, and that's how it's described in the Rig Veda. So it's one of the somya plants, soma-containing plants. So this admixtures add new dimensions. Then there is the new field, which is a corporate secret of hydronic medicine. And hydronic medicine uses the fifth nuclear force discovered by Rogerius and Tilly. and it makes macromolecules. An example of natural hypermagnicals. I should first explain magnicals. What Rogiero Santilli did was he produced an orgasmatron, or a lightning simulator.
A lightning simulator?
Because old physics doesn't deal with the inner problem, only with the outer problem. So the inner problem, like lightning, lightning is an inner problem. So he deals with it. To get true objectivity, you have to deal with the inner and outer problem, and all physics is focused just on the male or outer problem. So simulating lightning, he could put shit through, or benzene, or seawater, or a combination of those, and the way the atom is configured by the uncertainty principle, where the electron is anywhere you have it, is cancelled, and you get iso flat, 2 electrons, like twin souls, without valency bonding, that actually start to pass through the hadronic horizon. So they start to fuse, the electrons start to fuse. They're being drawn by an attractive fifth force, a kind of orgasmic force. And we all have that. And that's called an isoelectron.
An isoelectron?
Isoelectronium.
So this is an orgasmic force?
Actually,
So how do we cultivate this lightning orgasmic force? I like it.
Yeah, the attractive force in the heart of the atom.
Wow.
And so an isoelectron clusters together into millions, and this becomes magnicals. Magnicals are practical. You have magna gas. You can reverse the radioactivity with it. Although that part, the scientists were threatened. You take benzene, you produce a clean output. You have no pollution. You just have oxygen and nitrogen as a byproduct. 5,000 times more energy. It's used for welding by U.S. Naval Intelligence, cleaner cut. You can put your hand through the flame and you're not cut. You put steel through it and it's cut, which implies we're made out of something much, much more. And so the field of hypermagnicals is what's operating in biological systems. I mentioned yesterday that Dr. Stein Johansen, who's a hadronic physicist, cracked the 512K problem of all numbers and all number groups. And since all number equations are occurring in our body, it's impossible by the physics we've known to calculate what is an animate human being. Now he's made the formula of that, and it's 8-dimensional times 8-dimensional times 8-dimensional, 512-dimensional, continuously happening. We are 512-dimensional. And 8 hertz also does that. Okay. That's right. So that's
number.
Exactly. So you have this universal C, and you have this dielectric resonance of water at 8 hertz, and the 512 hertz in the electromagnetic absorption of water. Well observed. Yeah.
My other question to you was, considering the wealth of mystical experiences and experience that have paradigm-shattering experiences, what, in your opinion, are the most promising theories, science-based theories, or even faith belief systems that are the most promising ones that fit your current paradigm?
Yeah, paradigm is a problem because paradigm is based on neutron cascades, and neutrons don't really exist. They're temporary creations of fusions of electrons and protons in the new model, and they're decoupling. This produced the nuclear cascade. So the critical mass aspect and paradigm I don't subscribe to per se. I've drawn a lot. I had, of course, my own wisdom found, but I drew a lot of self-similarity from the work of Yeshi Chokshel, the sky dancer, Yeshi Chokshel, the sky dancer, who was bringing together absolutely all opposites.
The consort of Padma Sambhava.
And that was my clue into Darkroom retreats.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And she works with 108 plants, also with aphrodisiacs, in dark rooms with 3 lovers. And we'll basically go through the worst realms and the best realms and cancel them all out. And it's practiceless practice. Everything is the practice. Dzogchen. So everything is the meditation already. It's not something that you become in that sense. The 32nd path of Buddhism, it's to lose your seed is to kill a Buddha. The 33rd path, introduced as Dzogchen by Vajrananda and Padma Sambhava, To release or not to release, it's the same as the practice.
But that's the trick.
But
Dzogchen is a huge trick that is already here.
it's an omni trick.
Yeah, it is an omni trick, but it's
And the Rig Veda. So a lot from Egypt, of course. I think Egypt has, especially because of the acacia, the hierobotanicals is quite important, and the Sarasvati River Valley culture. And in terms of molecules, so the magnical medicine is macromolecules, and an example of hypermagnicals is when you have an ovum and you have a lot of seeds. It appears that all of the seeds know where each of the others are and is communicating with the one that's inseminating as one single macro resonance system. As an example of hypermagnicals, they're just beginning to make microscopes to be able to see these things because we didn't have the mathematics before. So we're made out of something completely different to what we knew before, and this leads completely new perspectives on molecules and macromolecules.
Going back to what you said before about genetics and how the genetic material for every species that has ever existed is contained within
junk DNA.
Junk DNA. Are you aware that, just a random fact that I thought I'd throw in, newts and salamanders have in the order of 10 times the amount of DNA that humans have, and most of it is satellite junk DNA.
Interesting. Is that a salamander that has a psychoactive secretion?
No, just newts and salamanders in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And there's a kind of pea that has about 3 to 5 times more DNA than humans. Just a pea. Yeah.
I just wanted to weave in, since you touched on the Vajrayana and Tibetan Buddhist practices. I know you said you were the originator of the Black Room technology.
The Darkroom.
I
call it Darkroom. Unfortunately, the gay movement also calls their things Darkrooms.
Okay.
So that was
we'll make
unfortunate.
Clear with difference.
Yeah. What?
We'll make a clear difference.
Yeah.
Distinction there. So, I know that the Tibetans have been using darkroom practices for a very long time.
Right.
And I personally have been working within the last couple of years and really tasting the difference of my entheogenic journeys and practices within either the nocturnal or diurnal, so from night or day. I remember once, quite a few years ago, somebody told me that they were growing marijuana and that it wouldn't blossom or something wouldn't grow unless there was darkness. And I thought there was such a sweet philosophy to that, of somehow akin to ourselves, there's a part of us, for example, the DMT is not created in our brain unless there's total darkness when we go to sleep. Is that correct?
Well, I'm more a nocturnal creature since my bicycle accident, near-death experience. So I have a tendency always to go at 5 and often have difficulty with the sun. One of the odd side effects. The creation of penoline, I think, is well established, and also harmalan or loterine, which creates rapid eye movements. So they're both selective monoamine oxidase inhibitors. With DMT, it depends what you've eaten, what's in your shit, what your lungs are producing, how much stress you've been under. In dark rooms, not everyone has a DMT experience. 5-MeO DMT is a greater majority. I would say 70% get a DMT experience. But we do a series of, follow a series of protocols. We have a diet that restricts tyramine-rich foods like bananas, avocados, miso soup, fermented foods.
Why?
Because tyramine will go to the brain, and usually the body detects it, and so will lower the beta-carboline rates or selective monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So that's one part. We use tryptophan, the essential amino acid 8, which is the foundation of DMT, melatonin, penoline, all of the tryptamines. And to assist that foundation nutritional base, B12, B6, methionine, that's the amino acid that says go, no go, and vitamin B12, I said already, zinc, and selenium. Then for the first 3 days, one sleeps a lot. The hallucinations you have is just basically the last photonic stimulation you've had continuing for about 24 to 36 hours. So one sleeps a lot, and you get this serotonin melatonin clock. You get up, you basically eat, wash, and you fall asleep again. On the 4th day, we cancel that by taking guarana. And no coffee in the first 3 days. But guarana then changes the serotonin melatonin loop. It seems to activate. That's what we observed. And for those who don't do it, this cycle continues. Otherwise, it activates the anterior part of the pineal gland and engages 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine. And when that happens, I'm now very familiar with 5-methoxy-DMT. I was just, when I began with this at 22 in 1992, I was just basing it on the literature, anecdotal literature, but it is identical. So you get the unification of the spine, you get the emptiness and the oneness, and on the 5th day, 5-MeO-DMT starts to become more active. So you see kind of moonlight. You use the moonlight to project your imagination out. What you start to get then is if you see this or the cup, you will see every horn you've ever seen start to stack up, or you'll see every cup you've ever seen stack up. So the nervous system, in that sense, for everything that it sees, uses what it's seen before, and it's co-present, so the nervous system becomes aware of itself. That's quite interesting. So if you move really quickly, you can start seeing the infrared, because the pineal gland is sensitive, photosensitive to infrared, to sound, to microwaves, and goes directly, dumps to the visual cortex. On the 8th day, then we do a series of breathing exercises, which is a kind of oxygen starvation, where you touch your toes, take a series of deep breaths. There's someone behind you, and you press on the chest. Normally you go unconscious, not in the darkroom, because penoline is an antioxidant, so it protects from brain damage. It also protects from stroke and such things. So that propels very often the DMT. So then you have to stand, and you're seeing the game board. You pass through the DMT game board into the first threshold of DMT. That's quite consistent. For some people, that then continues for the rest of the darkroom. On the 11th day, something really interesting starts to happen, and I'm trying to work out what molecules that is. The closest thing to it is dextromethorphan, methoxyethamine, and ketamine together. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
All in combination?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that, please?
That is methoxyethamine, dextromethorphan, which you have to use in a very special way, otherwise it just fucks you up, and ketamine. And blend it together. So with dextromethorphan, starting with 30 milligrams, waiting until you get an incense-like smell on the skin, sweetness at the roof of the mouth. Then you take 90 milligrams, that should build up, and then you go to 150 milligrams. And eyes up and in, rolling in, to prevent overheating from the hypothalamus. It cuts off the reptile brain and activates the cingulate gyrus. Once that is there as a kind of foundational plateau, then methoxyethamine, heart space, or from the middle to the outside, and ketamine is like in Buddhism, the Dharmakaya, the causal.
Dharmakaya, the causal.
Should we maybe tie it up?
What?
Should we maybe tie it up, or do you have any more questions?
I'm not wearing a tie. Never do.
No, I just thank you for going into. I'm specifically interested within the nocturnal practices and diurnal practices. I spent quite a lot of time within the starting of my entheogenic journeys doing just solo on relative darkness, just in a room, so still live streaming in. And over the last
it's got to be
years,
completely dark.
I've really actually been connecting with the photonic energy and being able to download so much data from the light. So would you say that I'd like to ask you something. Why do you feel that
Can I interject there?
Of course,
Yeah.
please do.
Because there is an interesting thing that happens when several times when we come out of the darkroom, we go out at night. You literally see the photons come in and the digitalization of reality. If you take the equation 1 divided by 49, you get 0.0248, 1632, 6428, 256, 512, the binomial sequence. At the 49th level of that, you've got the spectrum of photonic light. On the 80th octave, you've got cosmic rays. At 4 hertz, you've got the sense of touch. So you've got the complete sensorial spectrum. So around the middle, at the 49th level, you've got light, and light seems to be a conjugator of that binomial equation. The wave-particle duality, the way that we collapse the field by our observation, is directly working by the squaring of light. So in the
squaring of light?
Yeah, by consciousness.
Please elucidate on that?
Well, in the double slit
Okay.
experiment, or in the ruthenium experiment, where ruthenium is heated to a orbitally rearranged monatomic state, or a high spin state where it's invisible, so it's in a oneness, it's past, present, and future, zero electrical resistance. If a laser is flashed on the ruthenium as it's being excited into a Meissner field, the more flashes per second are being observed, 64 flashes per second, 75% is prevented from going in the high spin state. So there's that portion of the observer with the light that prevents this high spin state. So in the darkroom...
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to...
Yeah,
Okay.
I know, yeah.
And do you think that there's something that's self-sabotaging within humans, that many fear the dark? I mean, I always propagate, if people perhaps have some issues with themselves or don't know themselves yet, I say go into a forest and spend a night and a day by yourself. But there seems to be this global fear of darkness. And so I just wondered, since you've spent so much time within that field, whether you could just quickly just say a few words on that.
Yeah, absolutely. In Norway, all the children are afraid of trolls. I mean, it's beautiful elementals there. It's fantastic. That's what I also did as a teenager. You just watched a lot of horror movies to go through the fear archetypes, and then go into the forest, the wildest forest, and face that level of oneself. And then you discover the liberty, the freedom, and the beauty. With darkrooms, it gets light. You're walking in your imagination. You have to. You use it as a way to get around. I had a teacher from Thailand come in to learn the darkroom retreat, Mantak Chia, and he is very disciplined. So he had a hard time. He was hallucinating like crazy. And he couldn't just die and be born again constantly, because that's what you got to do. You're dead and you're back, and then you've got a reference to each of the hallucinations that way to navigate. If you do that, you have no problem. If you hold on to the hallucination, every cup you've ever seen is co-present. So he ended up in a little cupboard like that, and he thought it was a big bathroom. Because he was disciplined, and his teacher refused to teach him darkroom. He said that he wouldn't be ready in this life, so I guess he wasn't. So in the darkroom, it might be a small space. You might have, most people generally have a bedroom to themselves where they have their stash of food. There's a whole primordial thing with that. But you start to get beautiful places, also horrible places, but you see a lot of stuff. You see a lot of architectures, etc. So it's not dark anymore.
Illuminate. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, it was a surprise.
It was such a pleasure,
Yeah.
really. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights.
Non-dogmatically, by the way.
Thank you for the cosmic disclaimer there.
We're at Azora Festival 2017, and I'm here with Ananda Bosman. Can you tell us briefly about your background and your speciality, the Darkness Room retreats?
I don't know if it's my only speciality. I'm a myriad branches, but it's one of them. Thank you. Our background is, we are a plurality of backgrounds, really. So From the age of 15, after a near-death experience, I started getting enormous amounts of living information, and had a wide array of experiences, traveling what I called at the time extratemporal virtual reality. So it kind of feels like you're traveling to other planets or going through the sun into parallel planes and this kind of things. There were a lot of UFO encounters, there were trainings, and things like that. So I had a period where I was getting the experiential as a teenager. Then I started lifting up my middle fingers to what I was working with, and that withdrew and said no problems, and I started deep research, and so I get a stack of Scientific Americans, not understand the subject, go into the state I would go into, basically a kind of synesthesia, bring the five senses together, and very similar to 5-MeO DMT, I would have to say. And then I'd open a Scientific American, a picture would come out, the words would dress themselves, and I understood the subject, and I would write away, and did thousands of pages that way. And I started rapidly meeting scientists, researchers, etc. Then at some point in 1992, one of my, I say teachers in parentheses, it's a controversial subject for many people, but from my experience of it, ultra-terrestrial, Salvana, told me, look to the somas, Harmaline and DMT, regarding an experience I had in 1989 where I was invisible to 4 other people, very particular experience with vortexes. And those were the words that were used. When I was, so I immediately started looking. There was no internet then. I was in Amsterdam going through second-hand bookshops, etc. And eventually I found a journal reference to Bo Helmstedt at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, who had been studying yogis meditating in caves for 5 years. And he found that in their blood plasma they had mutated from serotonin base to beta-carbolines. And he included listing 10-methoxyharmaline. So no penoline yet in the literature. So it was the right thing to say, look at harmaline and DMT involved in the experience. So later, when I was 32, I found the Sutra of the Golden Light, where Salavana is teaching Ananda all about botanical plants, medicine, and many of those plants are of the 108, like Acorus calamus, which contains trimethoxyamphetamine with ammonia in the liver, which is quite active. And he also turned out to be the author of 3 hymns in the Rig Veda on soma. So look to the somas is what he said. So that was all quite interesting. That came out much later. And that's all documented as well. So then I started my darkroom research in 1992. I first did it alone in the Swiss Alps, one friend, and by 1993 was starting to bring in 10, 20 people at a time. Started with about 8 days, too short, went to 14 and 16 days, brought hundreds of people through with a wide variety of experiences. I had Professor Sten Johansson come in. He sent his anthropology students as part of the study of everything to darkrooms, which was pretty cool. He was quite amused. There was a cook coming from Switzerland who was, I was giving an intro and I was speaking like this somewhat with technical details on darkroom and the enzymatic pathways and so forth and so on. He says, well, you don't have to understand anything, do you? And so he was amused by that, because then in the darkroom, suddenly he started talking about, quantum foam in avid detail.
Quantum foam?
Quantum foam in avid detail, mini black and white holes, that interconnects the summation of the universe. And he was speaking about that in accurate avid detail, and then suddenly he was in these DMT geometries, and he was overwhelmed by them, but he was seeing the impossible. And somehow, maybe Nutella was involved, because no one else ate Nutella. He went in one of the strongest DMT experiences of darkrooms, and he was only eating Nutella. So maybe there's a clue in there. I'm trying to work it out. So we did a lot of darkroom research. We did also computer animation work based on some experiences we had as a teenager, and we made, I called it intergeometry at the time, something that is not 3D like a platonic solid or 4D like a hypercube, but something that's inter-D. So you have one part in this and one part in the next, which can be lifted to any dimension, rather than focusing on any illusion like a dimension, but rather the skeleton that unites the kind of like the topology of dimensionality. It turned out to be the hadronic physics of isogeometry. And the ISO unit is basically if you have an invariant triangle with its growth measures, which follow in nature, and was discovered by Sophus Lee. The invariant triangle goes to infinity and becomes torus, so you get the whole torus magnetic field theory from that. You've got the Klein bottle, they both knew each other, Sophus Lee and Felix Klein. And Klein made the four-dimensional Mobius strip, which was how to take the subject, the object, and the objective in which the object is into a single surface Mobius, which is the Felix Klein bottle. The Klein bottle is now an 8-dimensional system pioneered by Dr. Melanie Purcell, who I know personally, based on an octonian 8-dimensional system, which is where 7 dimensions are topologically upon an octonian isohypersphere as a single surface.
Might have to digest
Way
that
beyond
again.
me.
I thought I was
Play it in slow motion. Okay.
Thank you
Excuse
so
me.
much.
Round it up with that.